feels like to me that most people, if they were to get, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert here, you're the professional, but it feels like for me, because the social media is so widespread, so wide scale, everyone's on it, that most people probably are coming off of, or at least coming into, a consultation with, let's say, a dietitian with some like preconceived notions of what they're supposed to be doing, or maybe they need to be deprogrammed. Are you finding that's true? And if that's true, like, are people needing to like sort of like kill old bad habits first? Because it doesn't sound like people are coming in going, like you said, I don't know anything, please help me, right?
No, totally. And I think, I think Boston Medical Center had research that came out that said it estimated about 45 million Americans go on a diet every year, and about 50% of them opt for a fad diet, thanks to the marketing power and that drive that we talked about, right? So that's a lot of people that are coming in, about 23 million folks that are coming in each year of saying, hey, I tried a fad diet, it didn't work, how can we fix it? And I think from the coaching lens, when I first stepped into nutrition coaching back in 2015, it was a lot of conversation around how do we, the word deprogram that you said it hits home. Like, I love that word, because it was a lot of conversation back then about how do we deprogram some of the older population, because they've been in their ways for 40, 50, 60 years, right? It's like, how do you change somebody who is not stubborn, but has been doing the same thing for so long that you have to teach them something new or pull them out of what they've been doing? And what I've seen the lens of nutrition and nutrition coaching shift to is we're having those same conversations of how do you deprogram somebody from what they've done or what they're doing, but not with the 60, 70-year-old population. We're now seeing it with the 20, 30-year-old population.
Yeah, because it's not like they've just been around a long time, and so they've heard a bunch of different stuff, right? Maybe in the early, in the 90s, people were like, Atkins diet is what I did, or I was on Slim Fast. But now it's like you've got your pick of the litter, like cornucopia of every type of diet out there. And like, I have friends that have literally tried all of these for just a couple of weeks. Like, I had a friend that's been vegan. They literally texted me a couple of days ago, like, hey man, am I allowed to like cook with vegetables on the carnivore diet? And I'm like, wait a second, you're now on a carnivore diet? Like, what? First of all, you barely even moved, let alone, now you're doing such a crazy, wild, advanced diet for someone. And so it feels like those basics need to be so much more popular. What do you feel like are the first few things when someone's coming in from one of these crazy diets that you feel like you need to do, like practical, like, hey, you need to go back to the drawing board? Like, what are those things?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the mental state of it is one of the biggest parts, right? I don't want to confuse dietitians and nutrition coaches with counselors and therapists, but there is a lot of, we tend to, it's this weird thing that a social media account that has a big following tends to somehow pull somebody's trust more than a professional in the field sometimes, right? And that's one of the scariest things, in my opinion. And what we have to do is that deprogram. There's a lot of trust building that needs to be done there, right? I think about like stages of change when these folks are coming in with, hey, I know I kind of screwed up, right? I went carnivore for 2 weeks and then I shifted over to vegan for 2 weeks, and my body, I gave my body no time to adjust in between the two, hence why I didn't see any change. And now my blood panels all over the place. Like, they know what they've done wrong, but there's still no level of trust yet, because they're like, because you're not offering me anything sexy, anything instant gratification driven, right? So I think a lot of that first conversation is about just, let's just figure out what we've done, right? Don't demonize anything that they've done, and let them not demonize any of the food that they've eliminated in any of these diets. And then pull them back into conversation, right? Keto, for example, like I can go down a rabbit hole forever, but a lot of the conversations are like, hey, I know I'm not performing in my workouts how I should be, right? And that's why it's not reflecting on why my body composition is not changing the way I want it to be. But I've been on keto for so long, or I had such a unhealthy relationship with the keto diet, that I'm scared to introduce carbohydrates back into my life, right? That's a conversation I hear, I would say, 1 out of 5 nutrition consultations that I do. For me to go into that conversation and then be like, no, you actually need to bring in carbohydrates. Let's go ahead and bring you to 300 or 400 grams of carbohydrates per day. Like, that alone would just be like, hang up the phone. I'm never talking to this dietitian again. Right? So you need to find a happy median of like, give bite-sized pieces in terms of how do we integrate enjoyable carbohydrates or really anything that's been eliminated in these extreme diets in a way that they're like, okay, I see what you're putting on the table. I'll meet you halfway and give you this much. And what we need to provide as professionals is the science and the backing behind it so that they're not just coming into it as like, I listened to this person, now I'm listening to this person. It's more like, this is science backed, this is evidence backed, and that's why I'm okay following this dietitian's suggestions.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to something that most people don't think about a lot, and that's there's so much more psychology involved when it comes to diet. There's so much more emotional health that goes on in the dieting than we would like to lead on. Most of us like to think, hey, I'm a science experiment. I'm a math problem. This plus this equals this. But the truth is, we all have our own specific socialization. We've all been brought up a specific way. We've all been influenced by culture, by social media. And so we have preconceived notions and thoughts of what may or may not work. And we have fears in us around things that may harm us or what have you. And so what you're doing is, like you said, you don't want to, they're different, but in a sense they are connected. They're not mutually exclusive. And so, you're having to sort of break down, like you mentioned, not just what I believe is true about a diet and how it'll work for me, but also like, what am I afraid of? Why have I joined this diet in the first place? And why do I think, what happens if I fail? There's so many other things around the dieting that you're going to have to sort of cut through with what on the surface appears to be practical steps and wisdom. Like, let's say someone like you mentioned, keto diet, kind of a little, I don't believe carbs work. When in fact, there may be a little bit of like actually I have a fear that if I eat carbs, there may be, maybe I'm going to get fat, and what might that do to me? And what does that say about who I am? So there's so much more you're cutting through. And so, man, way to catch that, dude. You must see that a bunch.
Yeah, I think, and that's the scary part, right? I think we're shifting more and more and more in the mental state of it, which is, it's scary to see. Like, it's not the numbers on paper in terms of calories. It's not the numbers on paper in terms of macronutrients. It's not even the ingredient conversations right now. It's more so the population shifting to, like you said, like, having fear around certain things just because they're so bought in to some of these fad diets. And that's, I think that's where, again, we're seeing a bigger lens of, even negative body image and like certain things like that, right? Like out of the crazy number, the 23 million that we see on a diet every single year, and 50% of those trying a fad diet, like about 62% have dealt with negative body image, and that's why they're doing that, right? And then that already gives you a scary approach of like, oh boy, like the reason they're doing something extreme is because they're not comfortable with their body or how they feel about their body. So that's another mental conversation that comes into it. But then where the end of the road, where we have to be like, okay, pump the brakes, get with the dietitian, let's speak ASAP, is that about 77% of those folks that do a fad diet because they're not comfortable with body image end up reporting some kind of inadequate nutrition accuracy, which just ultimately, in simple terms, means that they're not getting a sufficient intake of essential nutrients to fulfill the requirements for optimal health, right? So it's scary that they're so bought in to some of these things as consumers when they know they're not doing something for longevity or sustainability. And that's where a lot of the mental deprogramming comes in, right? Like, I have to earn I think we're at a point in the nutrition field now, especially probably fitness too, to be honest with you, where we have to earn a significant amount of trust from the member before we're able to coach them through a successful session.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, it's the social media element of all this, even podcasts like this one. I mean, a lot of those types of people that are enjoying this, there's certainly like people that just at face value are enthusiasts around fitness and health. But there are a large percentage of us that are coming to this conversation with some junk, like something. Like you mentioned, we are fundamentally unhappy with either what we look like or how we're performing. And there's something behind that. And so, and even some of this wild adherence to these diets and what have you, all of that plays into this. And so they might be adhering to these things, but really philosophically, it's not that they don't want the results, but they're so married to something deep in them that they just feel like they need to accomplish it. Whether, like you mentioned, 62% of people with body image. I mean, that's significant, man. We're talking 6 out of 10 people, over 6 out of 10 people are, unhappy because they're too skinny, unhappy because they're too big. And so there's fear and anger and shame and all these things around dieting, exercising. And what you're finding is, hey man, because you're so married to this diet, because of all these emotional things, maybe you may or may not talk about explicitly, you're actually deficient in, you're not getting enough protein. You get your blood work done and you're off on all sorts of crazy things because of your adherence to the diet. And so the very thing you're trying to solve your issue with is actually causing you this dysfunction. I mean, talk about a catch-22, dude.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we're going for the Band-Aid approach of what gives the vanity feedback, and we're forgetting about the optimal health piece of it, right? It really is. Yeah. It's crazy to think about. And, when you think about those statistics too, one of the biggest things that we're seeing in terms of trends in population too is that, like, previously this conception of body image and diets around body image were around the female population, right? So we're now seeing 69% of males reporting dissatisfaction with their body in terms of weight or how they look too, right? That's a big number for guys.
Wow.
Like, imagine getting up, going to the gym, come back and be like, great workout, but I still feel like garbage in how I look, and just beating yourself up that way. That's why we're seeing this wide cast net of, like, I know I have an issue with seeing how I look in the mirror, and I know in order to resolve it, I'm going to go for a vanity Band-Aid diet, ultimately, instead of pumping the brakes, figuring out what Nutrition 101 looks like, and then just kind of building in. That's why, like, one of the tangents I could always go on, especially seeing the, more and more reports about, teenagers who are unhappy with how they look, right? One of the things is, like, if we were to be providing, education in nutrition or healthy eating or lifestyle change or behavior change in some of these, like, middle school and high school courses, right?
Yes.
Like, imagine offering a Foundations of Nutrition elective in a early high school course, right? To give them a better idea, then we wouldn't have, 78% of, females when they reach about 17 that are unhappy with their bodies, right? That's a big number.
Wow.
So we want to think about those things. And I think you hit it right on the head before when you said the social media piece. We spend so much time scrolling through social media, and whether we literally channel in on one person or one post, as we go through some of these, even if it takes us half a second to pass through somebody's post, we start kind of creating this bias in our head of, like, if I was a character in a video game, what would I look like, right? Like, that's ultimately how I think about it. So, like, the ideal version of me walking out on the street here on a summer day is like, I need to have a six-pack because that's normal for a guy in his early 30s, right? I need to make sure I can squat 400 pounds because every single person I follow on Instagram squats 400 pounds like it's their day job, right? Like, we tend to create this, like, very tight window frame around, like, the internet, which is so difficult and so difficult to ultimately unprogram and get them to a healthier headspace.